Rose sits in the guide rights protection counseling room looking dead serious. She stares at the counselor with wide eyes gripping her skirt. The counselor politely asks what brings her into the office today. Rose slams her hands on the table, declaring that a frail woman is being threatened by a heinous man. She dramatically begs the counselor to save the poor, helpless victim. The counselor is stunned and asks who the victim could possibly be. Rose points right at her own face and shouts that it's her. She explains she's been dealing with non-stop humiliation from a guy who's built like an absolute tank. With tears streaming down her face, she cries that her self-esteem is completely wrecked and she wants to see his arrogant face crushed. Suddenly, a deep voice calls out her name, sending shivers down her spine. It's Claude Dunhart glaring at her with piercing red eyes. Rose panics, wondering how he managed to track her down so fast. Claude leans in, whispering that he was worried when she disappeared from his sight. He traps her against the wall, asking if she forgot their little promise. He gets uncomfortably close and mutters that if she tries anything foolish, he'll mark her immediately. Claude threatens to go all the way with her right here and now. He explains that marking means they'll be permanently bonded as lifelong partners. Rose tries to defuse the situation, nervously stammering that she was just here for a friend. But Claude isn't having it and completely snaps, tired of holding back. Back in the counseling room, Rose winks through her tears, begging to be saved from this total psycho. She grabs the counselor, revealing that Claude is actually the main villain of this world. It turns out this universe is based on a reverse harem dating sim called Ardian's Savior Guide. The game revolves around the heroine Irene trying to win the affection of several male leads. In this lore, massive mutant monsters invade the city, and superpowered espers are the only ones who can fight them off. Meanwhile, female guides exist to support and stabilize the Esper's volatile powers. In her past life, an exhausted office worker was obsessively playing this game on her phone. She absolutely admired the beautiful protagonist, Irene Magnolia. The story takes place at the Esper Guide Protection Supervision Center. The player's goal was simple: manifest Irene as a guide and match her with a powerful Esper. She just wanted to reach a happy ending with literally anyone. But every time she tried to romance the kind S-rank Esper, the main villain would go totally berserk and kill everyone in his path. When she pivoted to the aloof second S-rank Esper, the villain rampaged again, getting her thrown into jail. She ended up dying after being forcibly dragged to an emergency assembly. Desperate, she tried clinging to the third S-rank Esper for survival. He promised to protect her with a charming smile. But nope, she got caught in another villain rampage and died anyway like a ragdoll. The poor gamer clutches her head, ready to throw her phone at the wall because the villain keeps ruining her runs. To make matters worse, the villain didn't even have a face reveal until a very specific ending. She frantically scrolled through the community forums looking for a strategy to beat him. But the entire comment section was just other players crying about getting wrecked by the exact same guy. Refusing to quit, she became absolutely determined to see the ending screen. She realized the villain only goes crazy because he never gets properly guided. Her master plan was to just match the heroine directly with the villain to fix him. She imagined Irene swooping in to soothe his chaotic energy with her holy presence. But the villain turned out to be a massive germaphobe and completely rejected the heroine's touch. Defeated, she concluded that the villain was just straight-up trash that had to be avoided at all costs. Fast forward to now, Claude corners Rose, who shrinks back in absolute disgust. That exhausted gamer actually got transmigrated into the game. She ended up in the same world as the crazy villain, but not as the beloved heroine. In her old life, she had it rough, constantly dealing with a toxic environment. Her own mother resented her existence, making her home life miserable. She had zero self-esteem and nowhere to ever let her guard down. She remembers breaking down in tears, wondering why she couldn't even find happiness inside a stupid video game. Which is exactly why she holds a massive grudge against Claude for ruining her escapism. When she first woke up in her new body, she was completely disoriented. She looked in the mirror and realized she had shape-shifted into a stunning pink-haired girl. Since she had zero attachments to her old life, she accepted her new reality without missing a beat. She started snooping around her room to figure out whose body she hijacked. Turns out, her character, Rose Valentine, is a guide who can't even control her own powers. Rose finds this incredibly suspicious. Normally, guides just have to touch an Esper to heal them. She quickly realizes this body is basically an irrelevant NPC. But for Rose, this is an absolute win. She clasps her hands, treating this as a gift from the heavens to live a drama-free, quiet life. Or so she thought until reality hit her like a freight train. She checks her bank account and realizes she is dead broke. Thrown into panic mode, she starts grinding nonstop just to survive. After hustling hard, she finally secures a job as an administrative clerk, scoring a free dorm and meals. Now safe from starvation, she starts mapping out a brand new plan. She decides to hide her guide abilities so she doesn't have to deal with random, dangerous espers. Her ultimate goal is to find a sweet, rich esper and secure her own peaceful, happy ending. Suddenly, her daydream is shattered by a blonde girl screaming at her for leaving water on the bathroom floor. The girl glares at her like she just committed a war crime. Rose sweats nervously, completely caught off guard by this aggressive energy. Because when she first moved into the dorms, she realized her roommate was none other than the game's angelic protagonist, Irene Magnolia. Rose had bowed respectfully, totally starstruck to meet her favorite character in the flesh. But living with Irene turned out to be a waking nightmare. Rose constantly finds herself apologizing for breathing wrong. Irene is an absolute neat freak who glares daggers if Rose comes home even a minute late. Even sipping tea too loudly earns her a vicious death stare. Irene looks more like the game's villainess than the heroine, leaving Rose completely terrified of her own roommate. Initially, Rose was worried about Irene getting killed by the villain. But now she's just sobbing in her room, feeling sorry for her own miserable living situation. Back in the present, Rose is speed-walking through the courtyard late at night. She stares up at the dorm building, dreading going inside. She knows if she walks in now, Irene is going to chew her out for breaking curfew. She decides to just chill outside until the beast finally falls asleep. The cool night breeze blows through her hair as she tries to relax. But she suddenly spots a dark figure slumped over in the bushes. Relieved it's just a person and not a mutant monster, she approaches cautiously. As she gets closer, she notices he's panting heavily and wearing a high-ranking Esper uniform. She rushes over to the collapsed man, gently asking if he's okay. He groans in pain, clutching his chest as he struggles to breathe. Rose notices he is violently shaking and completely losing control. Her eyes widen in pure panic as she realizes he's about to go on a full-blown power rampage. If left unchecked, he's going to explode and drain his entire life force. Her heart pounds as she realizes she has to stop him right now, but she has absolutely no idea how. Rose looks at the collapsed Esper and realizes there are no other guides around, and calling for backup would take way too long. Suddenly it clicks, she remembers that she's technically a guide too. She hesitates, staring at her hands, wondering if she can actually help since her weird condition usually stops her from using her powers on command. Deciding it's now or never, she reaches out, trying to focus all her energy into her palms. Miraculously, she feels a spark, but the Esper suddenly snaps awake and grabs her wrist like a vice grip. He yanks her right into his chest, panting heavily as she nervously tells him he needs to calm down. The Esper stares at her with intense red eyes, desperately begging for more of her energy. Before she can even process what's happening, he leans in and completely crashes his lips onto hers. She rationalizes that he's just desperate to stop the power rampage, but the kiss is still wildly overwhelming. He scoops her up into his arms, completely ignoring her muffled squirming. Rose starts panicking, realizing she can barely breathe and desperately needs him to stop. Suddenly, she notices a drop of blood trickling down his chin. She shivers, realizing she accidentally bit his lip just to snap him out of his trance. She immediately apologizes, gently wiping the blood off his mouth and asking if he's all right. But as she gets a closer look, her inner fangirl screams because this guy is insanely hot. He smoothly tells her he's totally fine and asks to keep going, gently stroking her hair. Rose pushes back, reminding him they need to call the center's director since the worst of his rampage is officially over. But he just nuzzles into her hand, practically purring as he begs her not to stop. She's totally thrown off. Instead of being aggressive, this overpowered Esper is acting like a clingy puppy asking for permission. She blushes, admitting to herself that his needy behavior is actually kinda cute. Shaking her head, she snaps back to reality, knowing she has to help stabilize his condition properly. She cups his face, agreeing to guide him but warning him to take it slow. He leans into her touch, his breathing still heavy and ragged. They lock lips again, surrounded by a magical glittering aura as her powers flow into him. Pulling away for air, Rose nervously checks if she hurt his injured lip again. But he doesn't care at all, pulling her right back in for a deep kiss to completely shut down the rampage. Suddenly she gasps, her eyes widening in pure shock. Reality hits her like a brick. She was so focused on him that she totally forgot they were making out in the middle of a public park. She imagines the entire center gossiping about her, completely terrified that her peaceful, under-the-radar reputation is about to get wrecked. Panicking, she pushes on his chest, declaring that she's given him enough guiding and needs to bounce. But he refuses to let go, holding her tight as she struggles like a trapped fish. He gives her the most pathetic, droopy-eyed look, asking if they can do just a little bit more. Rose stares at him, completely weak to his puppy dog guilt trip. But her survival instincts kick in, and she violently shoves herself out of his grip, sprinting away into the night. As she runs, she remembers a piece of game lore. The better the compatibility between an Esper and a guide, the more effective and satisfying the process is. Touching her lips, she realizes exactly what that means because kissing him felt ridiculously good. She recalls how his energy flowed through her like clean spring water, making her heart absolutely pound. Blushing, she wonders if she'll ever cross paths with the mysterious hot guy again. With her bright pink hair being so unique, she figures he'll definitely come looking for her once his head is clear. The next morning, Rose bumps into someone in the center, rubbing her sore head. She looks around, confused by the massive crowd of people causing a total traffic jam in the lobby. She taps a random guy on the shoulder, asking what all the commotion is about. He explains that an S-rank Esper almost went into a rampage last night, but a mystery guide saved him, so everyone has been summoned. Rose's heart skips a beat as she realizes they're literally talking about her. But then the panic sets in. Did he just say S-rank? She pieces it together. The guy from last night had jet black hair. And there's only one S-rank Esper in the entire center who matches that description. It's Claude Dunhart, the absolute menace of the game. Rose freezes in sheer terror, realizing she just made out with the world's main villain. Meanwhile, Claude is aggressively shaking his head at a random clerk, rejecting her on the spot. Rose watches from the doorway, completely baffled as to why everyone is lined up like cattle. Beside her, Irene rolls her eyes, clearly annoyed that an S-rank is wasting their time over this. Rose is internally screaming, kicking herself for not recognizing the game's final boss because it was too dark outside. Suddenly, Claude approaches a terrified security guard who was on patrol the night before. He demands to know absolutely everything about the guide who saved him. The trembling guard stammers that he felt a presence, but the area was completely empty by the time he arrived. He nervously admits the guide ran away so fast he couldn't even tell if it was a person or an animal. Claude's red eyes narrow dangerously, furious that the guard interrupted his guiding and didn't even catch the culprit's face. He threatens the poor guy, telling him to magically remember something right now if he values his life. Rose flinches, clutching her book to her chest as she watches him ruthlessly interrogate the staff. She realizes this is the absolute worst-case scenario. The psychotic villain is actively hunting her down. In the game's lore, Claude isn't just any S-rank Esper. He's the national hero and leader of the Espers, known as the absolute justice of Ardian. Rose starts sweating bullets, knowing it's only a matter of time before a guy with that much power tracks her down. To make things worse, she remembers that Claude actually murdered the heroine in the game because his severe germophobia made him hate being touched. Irene sighs next to her, criticizing Claude for throwing a fit over a guide whose face he didn't even see. Rose gasps, suddenly realizing that Claude might actually have zero memory of what she looks like. Two guys whisper nearby, confirming that Claude was hallucinating pretty badly during his rampage. Rose gets a massive spark of hope, connecting the dots that his rampage messed with his vision. It's a known fact that Espers lose control of their senses during a freakout, sometimes not even being able to tell an elephant from a squirrel. But her relief vanishes instantly as she remembers Claude is an S-rank, and her bright pink hair sticks out like a sore thumb. She tries to hide behind her book, praying for a miracle. Suddenly, a mousy girl steps out of the crowd, dramatically shouting that she was the one who guided Claude. The girl nervously stammers that she ran away out of embarrassment and begs Claude to let everyone else go. Rose peeks over her book, absolutely bewildered as to why this random girl is taking the fall for her. The girl blushes heavily, suggesting she and Claude go talk privately, totally exposing her massive crush on him. Claude just stares at her with a deadpan, terrifyingly unapproachable expression. Seeing her golden ticket out of there, Rose grabs Irene and whispers that they should sneak away while he's distracted. But before they can move, Claude completely shuts the imposter down, stating her lie is too pathetic to even acknowledge. He immediately shifts his gaze and his piercing red eyes lock straight onto Rose. Rose freezes like a deer in headlights, praying to the heavens he doesn't recognize her. But he starts walking directly toward her with terrifying purpose. Panicking, Rose hides behind Irene, trying to use the protagonist as a human meat shield. Claude stops right in front of them, his massive shadow looming over the girls. He stares down intensely and demands to know her name. Irene steps up confidently, thinking he's talking to her since she's the main character, and introduces herself. But Claude ruthlessly shuts her down, pointing directly at the violently shaking, pink-haired girl hiding behind her. Rose tears up, pointing to herself in pure disbelief as Claude impatiently asks if he needs to repeat himself. Irene quickly covers for her, introducing Rose as a level 7 clerk in the guide supervision department. She confidently explains that all clerks have to pass a strict characteristic exam before getting hired, proving on paper that Rose is just a normal civilian with zero special powers. Claude isn't convinced for a second and orders a nearby staff member to test Rose immediately. The staff member steps forward, but Rose is internally screaming, knowing she hasn't learned how to fully control her powers yet. She realizes if she accidentally activates her aura while they test her, Claude will instantly know she was his midnight savior. Desperate, she grabs the staff member's hand, asking for a moment while mentally preparing for her game over screen. Her heart hammers against her ribs as she holds his hand, terrified of what the test will show. She squeezes her eyes shut, waiting for the inevitable spark of power to expose her secret. She imagines Claude brutally slaughtering her on the spot for daring to touch his germophobic skin. But instead, the staff member looks completely confused, stating he doesn't feel any guiding powers at all and confirming she's a normal civilian. Claude glares at the staff member, his red eyes flashing with pure suspicion as he demands to know if they're absolutely sure. The staff member confirms he felt absolutely zero guiding powers when he held Rose's hand. Claude finally turns and leaves, and Rose lets out a massive breath. She slumps over, literally crying tears of joy because that was way too close. Since they proved she's basically a powerless NPC on paper, she figures Claude won't suspect her anymore. But over the next few days, Claude keeps suspiciously lingering around the guides department. The constant stress of being watched starts giving Rose intense nightmares. In her dream, Claude violently grabs her wrist. He accuses her of faking her test and hiding her true powers. He leans in with glowing red eyes, whispering that he finally found her. Then he absolutely chokes her out. Rose wakes up violently thrashing in her bed, with Irene standing over her, telling her to hurry up for group training. Rose shakes it off, hoping the dreams are just her anxiety acting up. She decides to stop overthinking it and just focus on her job. But the second she walks into the meeting room, Claude is glaring a hole right through her. She panics and whispers to Irene, but Irene just brushes her off. Today's group training is meant to help low-level Espers and guides get some real combat experience against mutants. Rose thinks it's a total joke for Claude to be here, since he basically uses the battlefield as his own personal playground. Suddenly, they lock eyes across the table and Rose's heart drops. Irene calls her name, breaking the terrifying tension. The arrogant protagonist just assumes Claude was staring at her because of her main character energy. The instructor wraps up the meeting, mentioning they have emergency teleportation scrolls prepared just in case things go south. Rose mentally plots to use her PTO and transfer out of the department immediately after this to escape Claude. Irene calls her over to get moving. The instructor introduces some extra guides assigned to their team. He explains they might need the extra backup today. Rose gets a bad feeling and realizes Claude is actually joining their specific squad. She leads the guides to the dungeon, praying to the heavens that this is all a massive coincidence. But internally, she is completely sweating bullets. Inside the cave, the lower-rank Espers immediately try to suck up to Claude. But Claude coldly shuts them down, telling them to get lost because they're annoying him. Rose stays in the back, totally confused as to why an overpowered S-rank is babysitting amateurs. The other guides are too busy fangirling over his insane visuals to care about his toxic personality. They gossip that it's romantic how he's desperately hunting for the mystery guide who saved him. One of them assumes he's definitely looking for one of the high-ranking girls. They don't really care who he picks, as long as someone distracts the terrifying villain. Suddenly, an arrogant guy speaks up, asking why everyone is making such a big deal out of an S-rank. It's Valen, a newly awakened A-rank Esper with a massive ego. He tries to flex his so-called fundamentals and openly flirts with the guides. But a guide immediately roasts him, calling him a creep and reminding him he still didn't make the S-rank cut. Valen's face goes bright red from the sudden humiliation. She rubs salt in the wound, loudly pointing out that Claude has better stats and a way better face. Valen loses his mind, furious that they're mocking him like this. The other Espers quickly step in to hold him back and cool him off. Rose watches the drama, noting that while Espers are considered elite on paper, the guides actually hold all the leverage because they literally keep the Espers alive. So smart Espers usually kiss up to the guides, but Valen is way too fresh to understand the hierarchy. Valen angrily stomps to the back of the group, standing right next to Rose, who silently wishes he'd go fight mutants instead. He notices her frantically writing on her clipboard and rudely asks what she's doing. Rose lets out an exhausted sigh, making it clear she just wants to go home. But this completely triggers the insecure Esper, who screams in her face, thinking a nobody is looking down on him. He angrily asks why a powerless human is acting so cocky. Rose is completely lost as to why she's catching strays. To show dominance, Valen literally summons a blazing fireball right in his hand. He threatens to teach her a lesson, and Rose starts shaking, begging for someone to step in. But she quickly realizes the harsh reality of this superpowered world. The other Aspers just watch with a smirk, treating her like entertainment because she's at the absolute bottom of the food chain. Rose realizes no one is coming to save her as Valen throws the fireball straight at her. He laughs like a maniac, mocking her for being so weak. Rose drops to the ground, narrowly dodging the attack as Valen tells her to learn her place. She frantically looks around, not knowing what to do. Her legs turn to jelly and she literally can't stand back up to run. Valen charges up an even bigger fireball, completely drunk on his own power. Rose squeezes her eyes shut, bracing to be burnt to a crisp. Suddenly, Valen yelps as something violently yanks him from behind. He gets launched across the cave like a rag doll by a massive wave of dark purple energy. The squad gasps in shock, whispering about who just wrecked the A rank. Valen coughs up blood and looks up in absolute terror to see Claude looming over him. Claude glares down with glowing red eyes. Rose is stunned, wondering why he isn't fighting the boss at the front lines. Claude calls Valen pathetic and abruptly announces that training is over. He orders the others to drag Valen's bruised body back to the center. Rose sits on the floor, completely bewildered by the sudden plot twist. She pieces it together. Claude joined her group, saved her from getting bullied, and is now ending the session early. For a split second, she wonders if the villain actually cares about her. But then she spots a pile of sparkling dust nearby. It's dead golem dust. Claude literally speedrun the dungeon boss just to get back here. Rose realizes one wrong move and she'll be reduced to dust too. She convinces herself Claude was just holding a grudge against Valen from earlier, refusing to believe he was protecting her. The instructor announces the perimeter is secure and calls everyone to gather around. Valen staggers to his feet, furious that they're casually leaving after humiliating him. Completely unhinged, he screams that he won't let them walk away. He slams his fists into the ground, trying to collapse the entire cave on top of them. A massive explosion rocks the dungeon as purple and red powers clash violently. Valen screams for them to die, having entered a full-blown power rampage. With his eyes completely blank, he yells at Claude to back off. But Claude casually blocks the fiery explosion with one hand, looking ridiculously bored. Without breaking a sweat, Claude flicks his wrist and sends a brutal shockwave right into Valen's face. Rose swallows hard, witnessing the true, terrifying gap between an A rank and an S rank. The instructor panics, yelling that Valen's attack severely weakened the cave and it's about to collapse. Rose scrambles and shouts that she has the emergency escape scroll. But there's a massive issue. The scroll has a strict 10-person limit, and because Claude brought extra guides, they have 12 people. She nervously asks if any of the Aspers know teleportation magic to carry the extra weight. She smiles hopefully, waiting for literally anyone else to volunteer. The instructor immediately points to Claude, asking if he can do it. He cheerfully suggests Claude can just take the powerless clerk back with him. Rose loses it, asking why she doesn't get a say in being left behind with the scary S rank. But the instructor completely ignores her and snatches the scroll right out of her hands. He tells her it's fine, activating the portal and telling the team to drag Valen inside. Rose bursts into tears, screaming at them not to abandon her with the monster. She watches in pure disbelief as they happily take the rampaging Valen over her and vanish. The dust settles and Claude lets out a dark, amused smirk. He steps out of the shadows, towering over a terrified Rose. With a wicked smile, he asks if she just called him a monster, leaving Rose completely trapped with the final boss. Claude just stares at her in dead silence, creating the most awkward tension ever. He lets out a sharp sigh as Rose drops to her knees and stammers an apology. Suddenly, he turns his back and starts walking away, prompting a panicked Rose to ask what's going to happen to her. She desperately calls out for him to wait up and chases after him. Internally, she's absolutely freaking out, realizing she just called the most unhinged villain in the world a monster to his face. In her panic, she completely loses her footing and crashes right into his back with a loud scream. She realizes with horror that she accidentally wrapped her arms around him in a full hug. Claude grits his teeth in pure rage and violently shoves her away, screaming at her for daring to touch him. Rose falls hard, totally stunned that he actually shoved her while the dungeon is literally falling apart around them. She watches in disbelief as he frantically brushes off his clothes, knowing he's a germaphobe but thinking this is way over the top. She remembers the passionate kiss they shared earlier and wonders if he's really just going to abandon her after that. Tears well up in her eyes, but she refuses to accept this game over screen. She points right at him and boldly threatens that if he leaves her behind, he'll regret it forever. Claude's red eyes instantly lock onto her, glowing with a terrifying intensity as he demands she repeat herself. He leans in menacingly, warning her that if she's just bluffing to get his attention, he's going to absolutely wreck her. Trembling under his aura, she doubles down and demands he take her back safely if he wants the intel. And just like that, she strikes a dangerous deal with the ultimate villain of the world. Fast forward to the center, and Esper confronts Irene's group, furious that they left Rose behind while she was injured. Irene gets defensive, snapping back that they didn't have a choice in the matter. Suddenly, Rose appears, and Irene immediately hits her with fake tears, crying about how ugly her injured face looks. But Claude steps right past Irene and gently grabs Rose's face, demanding she stop stalling. Irene glares at him, trying to intervene by saying Rose is hurt and they can talk later. Claude towers over them, coldly stating that he and Rose made a promise. Sweating bullets, Rose puts on a fake smile, preparing to drop the most massive lie of her life. She begins her description, claiming the mysterious guide had short brown or maybe black hair. She confidently adds that the person was also extremely tall. Internally, she celebrates her genius plan of describing the exact opposite of herself to stay off his radar. She blinks in shock when Claude doesn't immediately buy it, defensively asking if that isn't enough information. Suddenly, two massive goons grab her by the arms, making her completely panic. Claude glares down at her, stating there is no way he's going to blindly trust her words. Before she can protest, she's forcefully dragged away by his subordinates. She quickly learns that Claude's version of punishment is pure administrative hell. She is forced to manually flip through the files of every single guide in the entire database. She reads off the 213th profile, a tall guide with a short brown bob. Claude stands over her with his arms crossed, demanding she stay focused on the task. Hours pass, and Rose looks absolutely haggard as she continues her brutal punishment. She finally reaches the end of the pile and presents the last matching profile to Claude. Claude narrows his eyes, wondering if the person was unregistered, but Rose explains all clerks are strictly tested. Claude slams his hand on the desk, ordering his men to aggressively check every single person inside the center. Rose completely loses it, begging to be let go since she's been looking at files for days. Claude coldly retorts that she should have been a better witness, making her curse him out in her head. She snaps, shouting that he didn't even see the person while being guided, so how is she supposed to know? Claude's aura flares dangerously as he warns her she's getting too cocky, and Rose instantly folds faster than a lawn chair. Suddenly, a dazzling blonde man walks into the room with a gentle smile. He jokes that he heard Claude lost his mind, so he came to check on him, leaving Rose confused about his identity. The handsome newcomer glances down. He looks right at Rose, charmingly telling Claude he didn't expect to see such a cutie in his office. Rose's heart skips a beat, instantly deducing that someone with these insane visuals must be a major game character. He gently touches her pink hair, asking Claude if she's a newly awakened Esper. Then it clicks and Rose finally remembers who this guy is. It's Oscar, an A-rank guide who is incredibly popular with the fans just for being extremely attractive. Claude aggressively tells him to get lost, and Oscar sighs about his uncooperative attitude. Ignoring his grumpy friend, Oscar kneels right in front of Rose. He politely introduces himself and asks for her name. Rose is totally swooning over how kind he is compared to Claude and happily introduces herself. Oscar hits her with another charming smile, calling her name cute. Claude watches them interact and clicks his tongue in pure annoyance. He remembers how he aggressively demanded her name during the dungeon incident, and how she was so terrified that she could barely even stutter out a proper response. Seeing her so relaxed with Oscar makes Claude internally seethe with jealousy. Rose notices Claude's dark expression and is baffled by his sudden mood swing. Oscar chuckles, teasing Claude about hanging out with a normal person and asking if she's his type. Claude sighs heavily, claiming he's only keeping her hostage to find his mystery guide. Oscar casually insults Rose, saying she doesn't suit Claude anyway, instantly making her regret ever calling him kind. She bristles at the disrespect, realizing he's just a brunette monster exactly like his best friend. But the word brunette sparks a massive light bulb in her head, and she loudly declares she knows the guide's identity. Both men freeze, completely caught off guard by her sudden outburst. Claude glares at her, warning her not to spout any more nonsense. But Rose just giggles mischievously, fully committed to the bit. She dramatically points right at Oscar, declaring that he was the mystery guide. She smugly lists her fake traits, pointing out Oscar's short brown hair. Then she points at his legs, noting he perfectly matches the very tall description too. Oscar looks absolutely terrified, frantically asking when the hell he ever guided Claude. Claude is so disgusted by the thought that he violently shoves Oscar out of the way. Rose crosses her arms and smirks, enjoying this chaotic masterpiece she just orchestrated. But her smile fades when she notices Claude aggressively mumbling to himself in denial. He quietly mutters the word sweet, making Rose ask what he's talking about. Claude blushes heavily, touching his mouth as he reminisces about how soft and sweet the guide's lips were. Rose is completely grossed out, blurting out that those definitely weren't Oscar's lips. Claude's face darkens instantly as he turns his terrifying gaze back to her. Sweating nervously, she jokingly suggests he go kiss Oscar himself if he wants proof. Wanting no part in this cursed love triangle, she immediately dashes out of the room to save her own skin. The next morning, someone shakes Rose awake in her dorm bed. She groggily opens her eyes to see Irene standing over her. Rose calls her an angel, but Irene just sighs, bewildered at how Rose can be so calm after yesterday's chaos. Irene asks if she's still being threatened, suggesting they report Claude to the authorities. But Rose smiles brightly, brushing it off and claiming she perfectly manipulated the situation to her advantage. At work, she is in an incredibly good mood, happily grabbing documents from her coworkers. Irene nervously asks if she really took care of the Claude problem, but Rose is too happy to care about her nagging. When lunchtime rolls around, Rose excitedly hops up, ready to go stuff her face. She hums a happy tune on her way to the cafeteria, entirely unaware of the impending doom behind her. Suddenly, a deep, terrifying voice calls out her full name, stopping her dead in her tracks. She slowly turns around, completely horrified to see Claude looming over her like a grim reaper. He glares with absolute malice, asking how she dared to mess with him. Rose's imagination runs wild and she panics, asking if he actually went and kissed Oscar to test her theory. Claude looks at her like she's an idiot, firmly stating it definitely wasn't Oscar. He steps closer, his red eyes piercing right through her as he commands her to stop messing around and tell the truth. Rose flinches, internally screaming because she thought his misophobia would stop him from ever testing it. Desperate, she shouts that it's totally unfair for him to be mad if he didn't even try kissing the guy first. But Claude instantly shuts her down, declaring he didn't need to, his intuition alone told him she was lying to his face. Rose notices Claude actually looks more terrified than disgusted at the thought of kissing Oscar. She remembers a crucial piece of game lore: Claude has a severe guiding allergy. If a mismatched guide touches him, it feels like getting stabbed with needles, which is why he always wears gloves. Knowing he'd never willingly kiss a guy, she decides to use this massive weakness to her advantage. She confidently strikes a bet: if Claude can't prove Oscar is the mystery guide, he loses. And if he loses, he has to stop harassing her forever. Suddenly, Oscar casually pops up behind them, cheerfully interrupting the tense standoff. He calls out to Claude, looking completely unbothered by the villain's dark aura. Oscar turns to Rose, claiming he came to get her at Claude's specific request. He mentions Claude is busy, prompting Rose to awkwardly try and make her escape. But Oscar leans in, teasingly asking what her actual relationship with the villain is. He points out that Claude has literally never been seen hanging around a woman before. He chuckles, calling Rose a tiny bean, which instantly rubs her the wrong way. She glares at him, completely unamused by his condescending attitude. Internally, she realizes Oscar is treating her differently simply because she's a powerless civilian. She snaps back, asking if people often tell him he has zero tact. Oscar just laughs it off, leaving Rose completely exhausted by his two-faced personality. They finally arrive at their destination, and Rose asks where Claude went. Oscar cheerfully points him out, dodging her question entirely. Suddenly, Claude completely invades Oscar's personal space, making him sweat. Oscar playfully tells them to have a nice chat, while Rose wonders why Claude is standing so uncomfortably close to him. Claude glares at Oscar, warning Rose that her life is literally on the line with this bet. Rose crosses her arms, completely convinced that the germaphobe villain won't actually go through with it. Claude coldly asks Oscar if he's trying to drag him into a bet made with the tiny bean. Oscar smiles, agreeing that the nickname suits her perfectly. But Claude instantly shuts him down, demanding he stop calling her that. A heavy, awkward silence fills the room as Oscar realizes the vibe is completely off. Oscar nervously asks if something is going on between them and tries to excuse himself. Claude sighs, stating he called him here for a completely different reason. Oscar nervously laughs, pointing out that Claude usually hates even brushing against him. Suddenly, Claude reaches out and violently grabs Oscar's hands. Oscar absolutely loses his mind, screaming and asking if the villain is possessed. Rose watches from the sidelines, smiling smugly as karma totally wrecks the arrogant A-rank. Claude and Oscar aggressively bicker, with Oscar screaming that he only guides female aspers. He begs Claude to get his lips away from him, looking genuinely traumatized. But due to Claude's severe allergy, he can't even hold Oscar's hand, violently shoving him away before proving anything. Oscar sits on the floor, actually grateful to be thrown across the room instead of kissed. Claude grits his teeth in frustration while Rose triumphantly declares her victory. She points at him, firmly reminding the villain to keep his promise and leave her alone. Sometime later, Rose is doing her clerk duties, organizing the pill dispensary. She's helping out a pharmacist named Azir, who apologizes for the heavy workload. Rose cheerfully brushes it off, saying it's normal to help out short-staffed departments. Azir mentions they have one last quick task to wrap up before she can leave. Rose spots a secure door and asks what's inside the VIP room. Azir smiles, telling her there's a highly impressive person currently resting inside. He asks if she wants to go in and check it out. Rose hesitates, wondering if it's really okay for a lowly clerk to enter. She peeks inside and completely freezes. Claude is lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to an IV. She nervously asks if he's sleeping, utterly bewildered to see the monster looking so peaceful. Azir jokes that since Claude was mean to her, she could totally slap him right now for revenge. Rose panics, terrified that he'll wake up and snap her neck. Azir reassures her that Claude is in a deep, medically induced coma while receiving his synthetic guiding medicine. The liquid feels so agonizing that Claude has to take a massive dose of sleeping meds just to endure the process. Rose realizes that standard IV drips are basically useless on overpowered S-rank aspers. Azir shrugs, admitting there's hardly any effect, but since Claude refuses real guides, it's their only option. It's just a temporary fix, and eventually the medicine won't be enough to stop a rampage. Without proper guiding, he'll inevitably go completely berserk. Rose takes this all in, thinking it makes the world feel a little fairer. Claude has insane wealth, killer looks, and unmatched S-rank power that makes everyone jealous. But ironically, he lives in constant fear, never knowing when his own powers will kill him. Azir admits it was annoying when Claude threw a fit over the mystery guide, but he understands his desperation. Rose looks down, realizing his prickly attitude was just a massive defense mechanism. She realizes his obsessive hunt for her is literally just him fighting to survive. She remembers the game's lore, where his rampage destroyed half the center in a fiery explosion. In the original story, he was the ultimate villain who slaughtered Irene and all the male laids. But knowing he's just desperate to live, Rose finds that she can't hate him like she used to. Feeling a pang of guilt, she walks up to his bed, silently apologizing for running away. She gently pats his hair, wishing she had the power to actually stay by his side and help him. Suddenly, a visible spark of energy flashes from her hand. The shock completely startles her, making her scatter her papers all over the floor. Azir asks if she's okay, and she quickly blames the jolt on static electricity. She bows frantically, making up a fake excuse to get out of there immediately. Azir looks confused as Rose absolutely dashes out of the room in pure panic. Speedwalking down the hall, she freaks out over why her broken guiding powers suddenly activated. She realizes with horror that her abilities only seem to work on Claude. Suddenly, a massive, terrifying figure completely blocks her path. She freezes, her heart dropping into her stomach as she looks up. Claude slowly takes off his glove, his expression dark and unreadable. He glares right at her, demanding to know if she's the guide he's been searching for. Rose violently flinches, terrified that if her powers spark again, he'll know her secret. Claude steps closer, noting that this is exactly what happened last time and demanding to know how she's hiding it. He grits his teeth, completely certain that she's the one. Rose screams that she doesn't know either, claiming she can't control her powers and they might never work again. She desperately tells him to go find an actual guide who can heal him consistently. But Claude smirks, grabbing her wrist in a vice grip and declaring he won't fall for her lies twice. He corners her, pointing out she was the only witness last time and conveniently right beside his bed today. He steps into her personal space, asking if she seriously expects him to believe it's all a coincidence. Rose realizes she's backed into a dead end, but Claude smugly says she doesn't need to explain. He reminds her of her own words if he wants to know for sure. He has to confirm his suspicions by kissing her. He leans in dangerously close, telling a panicking Rose to stop chattering and focus on him. He gently strokes her cheek, getting closer to recreate the exact moment they shared in the forest. Rose's mind goes blank, remembering how incredibly soft his lips felt back then. She closes her eyes, feeling entirely dazed and expecting the kiss. But suddenly she opens her eyes and aggressively wipes her mouth, realizing he stopped. He pulled back at the last second, and Rose feels a weird, annoying ping of disappointment. Claude looks at her coldly, stating it seems she really isn't his guide after all. He narrows his red eyes, asking if she saw anyone else run through the hallway. Rose bites her lip, knowing that if she says no, he'll just keep suspecting her forever. Feeling a heavy wave of guilt, she realizes she has to drop one more massive lie if she wants to finally escape the villain. Rose throws out a massive lie, claiming she saw a brunette guide bolting out of the room in a huge hurry. She doubles down, saying the mysterious guide perfectly matched the fake description she gave earlier. Surprisingly, Claude completely buys it and actually lets her walk away. But her relief is incredibly short-lived. Azir awkwardly tells her that Claude is already summoning her back. Rose immediately starts whining, completely annoyed that winning the bet didn't actually get him off her back. But knowing she's just a lowly clerk, she forces a smile and trudges back to his office. Azir reassures her not to stress too much, kindly covering for her. Rose smiles, genuinely touched that he's looking out for her despite the suspicious situation. Walking down the hall, she dreads having to keep up her web of lies. She suddenly touches her lips, feeling a lingering tingle from when Claude got dangerously close to kissing her. Blushing, she quickly shakes her head, telling herself to forget about it and focus. She opens the door to Claude's office, putting on her best customer service smile. Claude coldly tells her to hurry up and step inside. But Rose completely freezes, her eyes widening in pure shock at the person sitting next to him. It's Shauna McQueen, the only other A-rank guide in the entire center besides Oscar. Rose gulps, terrified that her fake description is about to get busted right here and now. She awkwardly steps into the room, feeling the tension instantly. Shauna narrows her eyes, hitting Rose with an absolutely deadly glare. Rose starts sweating bullets, wondering why this high-ranking guide is looking at her like she's a piece of trash. Claude asks Rose the million-dollar question, cutting straight to the chase. He demands to know if Shauna is the brunette guide she supposedly saw running away. Rose stammers, awkwardly pointing out that while Shauna is tall, her hairstyle is completely different. Claude's aura turns pitch black as he pressures her for a straight yes or no answer, totally cornering her. Panicking, Rose tries to pass the mic, suggesting they just ask Shauna directly. To her surprise, Shauna actually stands up for her, telling Claude to interrogate her instead of a civilian. Rose gasps, instantly impressed by Shauna's boldness. Claude leans forward, his massive frame towering over Shauna as the tension spikes. He gets right in her face, flat out asking if she was the one who guided him. But Shauna doesn't flinch. She smirks, playfully daring the villain to try harder if he wants the truth. Rose shivers in the background, feeling like she's caught in the middle of a highly dangerous love triangle. Unfortunately for Rose, this is just the beginning of her nightmare. For the next few days, she is forcefully dragged along as a third wheel on Claude and Shauna's outings. She suffers through a park stroll, an amusement park visit, a beach walk, and now a ridiculously awkward coffee date. Rose violently stabs her iced coffee, internally screaming at them to just hold hands and stop involving her. She glares at the back of Claude's head, completely exhausted by this dynamic. She watches them chat, totally baffled that Claude can actually hold a normal, polite conversation with Shauna. Meanwhile, he constantly glares, threatens, and treats Rose like absolute garbage. She remembers all the times he's intimidated her and feels incredibly salty about the double standard. She huffs, wondering if his severe germophobia is magically cured around Shauna, when she suddenly feels eyes on her. She looks up and gasps, completely blinded by a glowing, handsome blonde man. It's Daniel, Wilhelm, and Liebner, the three other male leads from the original game. Rose internally fangirls, thrilled to see her former 2D boyfriends looking absolutely flawless in real life. But she quickly gets confused, wondering why these top-tier S-rank aspers are following Claude around like an entourage. She politely clears her throat and asks them what their deal is. Daniel smiles brightly, happily answering her question. He casually admits that Claude is just ridiculously handsome and cool, even to other guys. Wilhelm chimes in, saying he's totally in awe of Claude's battlefield presence. Liebner agrees, adding that Claude's abilities are legendary and it's only natural to look up to him. Rose deadpans, completely losing all respect for them. She realizes these supposedly overpowered game leads are actually just massive Claude fanboys. While she sees Claude as a merciless psychopath, these guys worship him like a literal god. She stares at them in pure disbelief. Daniel notices her tired expression and asks if she's having a hard time. He kindly offers to buy her snacks on the center's expense account, instantly lifting her spirits. Rose's eyes sparkle as she asks if she can get a pastry. Daniel warmly agrees, totally happy to spoil her. Moments later, Rose gets an absolutely massive dessert tower and claps her hands in pure joy. She happily stuffs her face, enjoying the sweet escape from Claude's toxic vibe. Daniel watches her with a soft smile, asking if it really tastes that good. Without thinking, Rose scoops up a bite and offers it right to him. Daniel and the other guys happily eat from her spoon, acting like absolute golden retrievers. Shauna notices the wholesome interaction and smirks, clearly plotting something. Claude glares at Rose, visibly annoyed by her having fun with his fanboys. He suddenly points at her, snapping her out of her sugar rush. He coldly orders her to stop slacking off and go fetch them some napkins. Rose points to herself in confusion, completely offended that he's treating her like a waitress. But Claude hits her with a death glare, forcing her to comply. She stomps away, fuming over how he's perfectly polite to Shauna but constantly bullies her. She returns and slams the napkins on the table with a fake smile. Announcing she's leaving, she prepares to finally escape. Claude just ignores her completely, acting like she doesn't exist. He casually turns back to the conversation, sipping his coffee. Shauna sighs happily, enjoying her drink and the attention. Rose decides two can play at that game and aggressively eats her strawberry cake in defiance. She offers the cake to Claude to assert dominance, but he just stares at her silently. Suddenly, Shauna quickly leans forward, completely blocking Claude's view of Rose. She looks genuinely annoyed, asking why he's staring at the clerk instead of focusing on their date. Claude crosses his arms, looking completely unbothered by her jealousy. He coldly tells Shauna to just spit out whatever she wants to say instead of playing games. Insulted by his icy tone, Shauna declares the date is over and abruptly stands up to leave. Rose watches her walk away, totally confused as to why the vibe got ruined so fast. As Shauna passes by, she suddenly stops right next to Rose. She hits Rose with an absolutely venomous side-eye before storming out. A few days pass and the tension only gets worse. Rose shudders as she hears the terrifying click-clack of heels approaching her desk. It's Shauna, who has started dropping by the clerk's office every single day just to make Rose's life miserable. She goes full Karen, demanding to know if Rose finished a ridiculous list of tasks. Rose awkwardly scratches her head, admitting she hasn't had the time to completely soundproof the building. Shauna absolutely explodes, screaming at her for being useless. A sweet male clerk tries to step in and defend Rose, noting she's still new. But Shauna instantly shuts him down with a terrifying glare, making the poor guy violently tremble and back away. He awkwardly chuckles and shrinks into the corner, completely abandoning Rose. Rose realizes Shauna is mercilessly bullying her just because she ate cake and lacked tact during the coffee date. To make matters worse, she gets another notification for yet another Claude and Shauna date. Rose completely gives up, trudging through the garden like a zombie. She mentally pictures Claude and Shauna as two demons stabbing her with pitchforks, exhausted by their constant demands. She pauses, genuinely wondering if she should report them both to HR for workplace harassment. But she immediately imagines Claude blasting her into orbit with his dark magic for daring to snitch. Shaking her head, she realizes HR can't save her from an S rank, so she decides to just focus on surviving. She finally arrives at the meeting spot, only to find Claude and Shauna glaring at her for being late. She forces a miserable smile, completely stuck with her absolute least favorite people on Earth. Claude glances back, warning Rose not to get lost in the massive festival crowd. Rose sighs heavily, looking completely drained from all the walking. She notices it's just the two of them and asks if his usual fanboy entourage isn't joining them today. Claude glares icily over his shoulder, flat out stating they will never be coming along again. Rose flinches, wondering if she hit a nerve because he looks genuinely pissed. Internally, she mourns the loss of her favorite blonde fanboy, realizing she's totally alone with the villain. Suddenly, Shauna appears out of nowhere and grabs Claude's arm. But Claude immediately recoils, coldly ordering her to keep her distance. Rose watches this go down, realizing Shauna isn't an exception to his strict no-touching rule either. Her mind races, wondering if he's actually trying to make this date work despite his severe mysophobia. Her deep thoughts are completely ruined when her stomach lets out a massive growl. Without a word, Claude holds out a fresh chicken skewer right in front of her face. He raises an eyebrow, asking if she doesn't like it. Rose frantically waves her hands and snatches it, thanking him before devouring the whole thing. She smiles happily, her hunger finally satisfied. And for some reason, that skewer opens the floodgates, because Claude just starts buying her literally every street food in sight. Rose is completely stoked to eat like a queen while enjoying the festival. But after walking all day, her legs are absolutely killing her, so Claude suggests they head back. Suddenly, someone in the crowd violently bumps into Rose from behind. She stumbles forward, bracing for impact. But Claude catches her smoothly, pulling her flush against his chest while glaring daggers at the annoying crowd. He quickly pulls her out of the bustling street and into a quiet alleyway to wait out the rush. He sighs in frustration, muttering that he hates crowded places. Rose realizes this must be pure torture for his germophobia, but she's also super hyper-aware of how closely he's holding her. She remembers how violently he rejected Shauna's touch just an hour ago. Her heart pounds like crazy, wondering if he's actually okay with her being pressed up against him like this. Suddenly, she gasps, spotting a familiar face in the distance. She shoves Claude back, urgently telling him to wait. She points right at Shauna, accusing Claude of ditching his actual date just to hide in an alley with her. Claude totally brushes it off, coolly stating Shauna can find her own way home. Rose gets annoyed, muttering that she wasted her entire weekend third-wheeling for absolutely no reason. Claude leans in dangerously close, telling her to speak up if she has a problem. Flustered by his intense gaze, she frantically shakes her head, totally trapped in his space. But then she completely freezes. Her rogue guiding powers decide to pull a fast one, sparking to life right as she's holding his hands. Claude stares down at her with wide eyes, demanding she finish what she was saying. Fast forward to the next day, Rose looks absolutely haggard in the break room, stressed out of her mind. She remembers how Claude just stared at her after the accidental pulse, but then acted like nothing even happened. What's keeping her up at night is that he actually carried her all the way back to her dorm, looking completely unfazed. She even thought she saw a genuine, soft smile on his face when he told her goodnight. Feeling dazed, she realizes his behavior makes absolutely zero sense for a germophobic villain. A coworker suddenly breaks her trance, handing her a box and telling her she's been reassigned. Rose's jaw drops as she learns she's being moved to the high-stress Esper support department. She groans, barely able to carry the heavy box of files, completely dreading the workload. She finds her new office and notices the door is cracked open. Stepping inside, she instantly gasps. Claude is standing right there waiting for her. She nervously asks if this is his personal office. Claude just glares and orders her to come inside. He casually points to a desk in the corner, telling her it's hers now. Rose is internally screaming, realizing she is going to be working right under the villain's nose. She forces a painfully awkward smile, asking if she's basically his personal secretary now. After he confirms it, she nervously laughs, asking who had this cursed job before her. Claude hits her with a deadpan stare, refusing to answer. He tells her she can just rest until he gives her an order, and even offers her completely free reign over his fully stocked fridge. And honestly, Rose takes that completely literally, doing absolutely nothing but watching the clock. Well, nothing except absolutely demolishing every single top-tier dessert inside that fridge. Feeling drowsy and stuffed, she happily thinks that being the villain's secretary is basically a dream job. Suddenly, she catches Claude staring at her and panics, thinking she's about to get fired for dozing off. Instead, he just tells her to grab her sweater and follow him out. She internally cries that her shift is basically over, but feels too guilty from eating all his food to say no. He takes her to a gorgeous, ridiculously high-end restaurant with a perfect sunset view. Rose shrinks beside his massive frame, feeling totally out of place in such a luxurious spot. She assumes he must have booked this fancy place to make up with Shauna. The maitre d' politely greets Claude, escorting them to a private area. Rose follows like a lost puppy, hoping she at least gets to try the food. Claude sits down, then frowns, asking why she's standing all the way across the table. He taps the seat directly next to him, telling her to sit down. Rose is shocked, asking if she's actually eating here alone with him. He sighs, ordering her to stop worrying and just sit. She nervously asks if he really wants her right next to him. Claude's aura turns menacing as he asks if she has a problem with it, making her immediately scramble into the chair. The waiter hands her a menu and her eyes go wide. She starts practically drooling, completely overwhelmed by how delicious everything looks. Claude and the waiter just stare as she visibly sweats, entirely unable to make a decision. Tired of waiting, Claude pulls the ultimate rich guy flex and just orders literally everything on the menu. Rose blushes furiously, completely starstruck by how casually he just dropped a fortune. A short while later, an absolute mountain of gourmet food arrives, looking like a royal feast. Her eyes sparkle like crazy as she mentally bows to the villain, gaining massive respect for him. But mid-bite, she pauses, remembering her theory about Shauna. Claude gracefully eats a piece of fruit, warning her not to get mad at whatever she's about to ask. Rose nervously asks why he isn't having this fancy dinner with his actual guide. Claude drops a total bombshell, coldly stating that Shauna means nothing to him anymore. Rose is baffled, pointing out that Shauna is the exact guide he's been desperately looking for. Claude shuts it down, flatly stating it isn't her. Rose sweats, asking how he could possibly know. He explains that Espers have a natural instinct for which guides are perfectly compatible with them. Rose starts panicking, terrified that he's figured out she was his midnight savior. She asks if he finally found the right person, but Claude shakes his head. He mentions he wanted to find them before getting dispatched, totally confusing her. He casually reveals he's going on a highly dangerous solo mission to close a collapsing gate, completely unguided. He drops another heavy truth. If he enters a power rampage during the mission, he definitely won't be coming back alive. Rose asks why he doesn't just cancel, but he explains that a rampage is inevitable, and delaying it just prolongs his agony. He calmly adds that if he's going to explode, it's better to do it somewhere isolated where he won't hurt civilians. Rose remembers the game lore. When an Esper dies from a rampage, they basically detonate like a literal nuke. The reality hits her like a truck, and she asks if this lavish dinner is supposed to be his last supper. Claude looks away, softly telling her to consider it his final gift to her for everything he's put her through. Rose is struck completely silent, her heart throbbing with a sudden, overwhelming guilt. Later that night, Rose stares at a bag of leftover bread from the restaurant, feeling completely miserable. She remembers how the villain destroys everything in the original story, but realizes no one has actually died in this reality yet. She thinks back to his surprising kindness, buying her dinner just to apologize for his harsh behavior. Gripped by a heavy conscience, she stares into space, wondering if letting Claude walk to his death is really the right thing to do. Rose wrestles with the terrifying thought of Claude actually imprinting on her. Unable to sleep, she sneaks into Irene's room and nervously wakes the protagonist up. Irene is completely unamused, tiredly asking why Rose is bothering her at this ungodly hour. Rose gets on her knees, begging for a rational person's advice to solve a massive dilemma. She hits her with the ultimate puppy dog eyes, absolutely pleading for help. Irene sighs in defeat, throwing off her covers and agreeing to listen to her nonsense. Rose tries to be subtle, describing a friend who's dealing with a handsome guy surrounded by bad rumors. She vaguely explains that this friend might be the only one who can help him with a serious problem. Irene instantly sees right through the BS, flat out asking if Claude's attempts to woo her are actually working. Rose gasps, but Irene tells her not to deny it, since everyone knows Claude's been dragging her around all week. She pokes Rose right on the nose, telling her to drop the innocent act. Irene drops some harsh truth, warning that a guy who's lorded over people his whole life doesn't actually know how to be kind. She states Claude is totally out of her league and is likely just manipulating her naive heart. Irene brutally tells her to get real and stop falling for her own daydreams. The next day, Rose admits that Irene's reality check made a lot of sense. She sneaks over to the medical wing, quietly opening the door. Spotting her target, she happily asks if she can come inside. Azir greets her with a warm, welcoming smile. Rose is instantly relieved, hoping he'll give her a way more positive opinion than Irene did. She notices the table full of treats, and Azir explains Claude rejected the snacks so she can have them. Azir chuckles, glad to see she's surviving her time with the terrifying S-rank. Rose laughs, admitting she actually agrees with that nickname sometimes. Getting down to business, Rose taps her chin and reveals she came to him because she has a dilemma. She drops the absolute bomb, she was the one who accidentally guided Claude. But Azir doesn't even flinch, casually stirring his drink and admitting he already had his suspicions. He explains he kept his mouth shut to respect her secret identity. Rose beams with relief, glad she isn't facing a life sentence. She vividly imagines Claude locking her in a dark dungeon if he ever found out she lied to him. Azir leans in, asking what her actual dilemma is if she's so worried about hiding. Rose blushes furiously, admitting that after spending so much time with the villain, she's actually starting to think he might not be such a bad guy after all. Azir hits her with a deadpan stare, bluntly asking if she's catching feelings for him. Rose frantically waves her hands, aggressively denying the crush allegations. Trying to change the subject, she mentions Claude's upcoming, highly dangerous mission. She remembers him saying it's basically a suicide run. Rose admits her conscience won't let her just sit back and watch him die. She nervously asks Azir if there's any way she can secretly guide him one last time before he leaves. Azir claps his hands together, a brilliant idea forming. He smiles, assuring her that he's got the perfect plan to pull this off. Over at the Esper Center, Claude's intensive treatment is about to begin. Claude lies in the medical bed, completely exhausted by the agonizing side effects of his medication. For his entire life, Claude Dunhart has been seen as a man blessed by the gods. Born into a prestigious family, he had unmatched power and a totally perfect life. But the moment his S-rank powers fully awakened, his absolute nightmare of a curse began. He developed an unprecedented guiding allergy, making any contact with a guide pure torture. Despite the agony, his father constantly forced guides on him to manage his powers. The pain would send his senses into absolute overdrive, plunging his world into darkness. It felt like his body was literally being fried from the inside out. The suffering was so intense that he genuinely wished for death over living like that forever. But then everything changed in one single moment. He remembers a girl's soft, gentle touch sweeping over his face. That clear, invigorating energy didn't hurt him, it completely saved his life. Back in the present, Rose peeks her head into the medical room. She remembers Azir explaining that Claude is getting a massive dose of synthetic guiding medicine. While he's heavily sedated, she can tiptoe in, guide him, and dip out without blowing her cover. She creeps up to the bed, relieved to see the terrifying villain sleeping like a baby. But suddenly she realizes a massive flaw in her master plan. She has absolutely zero clue how to actually activate her guiding powers on command. She tries furiously poking his forehead, but she gets absolutely nothing. She grabs her hair in panic, completely stressing out because her previous successes were total flukes. Deciding to go back to the basics, she carefully grabs his hand. A small spark of energy finally activates, and Rose breathes a massive sigh of relief. But sensing it's not quite enough, she leans in to give him a little smooch on the cheek. Suddenly, Claude's eyes snap open and he grabs her, instantly pulling her close. Because from Claude's perspective, he's been oddly drawn to her since day one. He couldn't figure out why this random pink-haired girl constantly held his attention. He had reviewed her file, completely confused as to why a powerless clerk was making him feel this way. He realized she was definitely just a normal person on paper. But his mind kept drifting to her, giving him an overwhelming urge to just hold her. Claude, having never experienced these intense feelings, was completely thrown off balance. He started keeping her close, watching her every move like a hawk. He remembers her goofy little face trying to set him up with Oscar to dodge his questions. He recalls feeling a dark, ominous surge of pure jealousy at the thought. It turns out that exact incident was what finally pushed him over the edge. He remembers Oscar completely panicking, thinking Claude actually had a crush on him. Claude was terrified that Rose was plotting to ruthlessly stamp out his feelings and reject him. So he literally launched Azir across the room, brutally demanding answers about her. Azir spilled the beans like a coward, confirming that Rose was the mystery guide all along. Claude brought the intel straight to Oscar, asking for advice. Claude wanted to catch her, but admitted she was constantly trying to run for the hills. Oscar was totally stunned to hear that the lowly clerk was the legendary S-rank guide. Claude seriously asked his friend how to capture her heart. Oscar suggested a tactical approach, making her lower her guard and feel less afraid of him. Claude fiercely declared he'd do absolutely anything to keep Rose by his side. And so, the ultimate 5D chess performance was put into motion to trick one clueless girl. He slowly fed her street food to ease her anxiety. He carefully navigated the annoying fanboy roadblocks that constantly popped up. Claude absolutely hated every second of it, but he endured it like a pro. In the end, his grand master plan worked perfectly. Back in the hospital room, Azir had warned him that the heavy medication couldn't be taken while conscious. But Claude firmly refused the sleeping drugs, absolutely determined not to miss his chance to catch her red-handed. Azir sighed, calling the lovesick villain an absolute fool. Azir walked out, wishing him luck on his insane trap. Claude forced himself to endure the agonizing medicine while wide awake, feeling like he was drinking literal sewer water. He pushed through the immense pain, knowing it would all be worth it. Because the moment she finally pressed her lips to his, he caught his elusive guide once and for all. Back in reality, Rose is forced to hold her arms straight up in the air as punishment. Claude coldly tells her to do it properly and stop slacking off, totally enjoying her misery. Rose cries anime tears, absolutely devastated that her flawless secret identity got wrecked by a fake coma. Rose nervously asks how long she has to keep doing this. Claude calmly replies that it's until she realizes everything she did wrong. She mentally panics, knowing she's done way too many things to count. He sighs, pointing out that she hid the fact that she guided him that night. Rose internally screams that she only hid it so he wouldn't literally decapitate her like in the original game. Claude leans in, his expression darkening. Rose blushes as she realizes where this is going. He aggressively asks if her silence means she's interested in another Esper. A sudden chill runs down her spine. She quickly shoves him back. If she becomes the target of his jealousy, she is totally cooked. Stuttering, she insists she doesn't dislike him, but she just can't control her powers. Claude easily brushes off her concern. He smoothly declares that if it doesn't work right away, they can just keep going until it does, slowly pulling off his gloves. Rose stares at him in absolute shock. He pulls her close. Then he casually suggests they should just imprint first. Her mind completely short-circuits. The word echoes in her head like a jump scare. She internally screams at the top of her lungs. Imprinting means an Esper and guide are exclusively bonded forever. It's basically marriage without the option to ever divorce. And to complete the process, they have to spend a very intimate night together. Rose turns beet red as she realizes what he's actually asking. Suddenly, Claude starts unbuttoning his shirt right then and there. In a desperate panic, she blurts out that they should live together instead. She awkwardly coughs, trying to play off her massive stall tactic. Claude hits her with a devious grin and agrees to the plan. Rose remembers that Claude usually lives in his own private home due to his severe germophobia. They arrive at his sleek, modern mansion. She does a happy dance, hyped to be living in luxury. Claude offers to show her around inside. She eagerly opens the door, expecting a chic, dark aesthetic. Instead, the place is completely empty and barren. Claude tells her to let him know if she needs anything, and her interior design instincts kick in. She plots to decorate the house exactly to her tastes, hoping it'll annoy him enough to kick her out. But fast forward, and he's happily taking care of the plants she brought in. Meanwhile, Rose is living her absolute best life, sprawling on a massive, comfy bed. Unlike her old roommate, Claude is a neat freak who aggressively cleans everything himself. Even better, he tells her they can work from home now. She spends her days getting paid just to laze around like a total couch potato. A knock on the door interrupts her lazy morning. It turns out Claude has another unexpected habit. He constantly buys her massive feasts and regional delicacies. But as she eats, she notices he's just sitting there intensely staring at her. When she asks why he isn't eating, he simply says he's not hungry. Her paranoia starts kicking in big time. She wildly accuses him of trying to fatten her up. She figures he wants her to look like a little piggy, so no other Esper will ever want her guiding. Claude physically shakes with laughter at her ridiculous theory. He confidently states no Esper would ever dare try to steal his guide anyway. Rose is completely baffled. Still suspicious, she stubbornly pushes her plate away and refuses to eat another bite. Claude immediately counters by whipping out a highly exclusive strawberry cake. Her eyes sparkle like crazy as she recognizes the famous dessert. She completely folds, happily stuffing her face while Claude watches fondly. She can't help but notice he looks even more handsome than usual. She realizes he keeps treating her like absolute royalty instead of kicking her out. Sitting beside him, she actually starts feeling a little guilty. Surprisingly, he hasn't tried to force an imprint since she moved in. She finally asks if it's really okay for her to just leech off him like this. Claude admits he usually hates people who don't work. He leans in dangerously close. Gently touching her cheek, he whispers that she is the only exception. Her heart completely skips a beat. Suddenly, her guiding powers flare to life. Before she can process it, Claude leans in for a kiss. She tries to focus on why her powers activated, but the feeling is totally overwhelming. Her mind goes completely blank. The guiding energy surges between them stronger than ever before. Rose stares up at him, totally flushed and out of breath. Claude hovers over her, looking completely satisfied. She frantically demands to know how he triggered her powers. He just chuckles softly. Tracing her face, he tells her she's incredibly interesting. Later, Rose paces around her luxurious new home. She thinks about her high-class meals and her ridiculously good-looking roommate. But then she starts tearing her hair out in pure frustration. Claude seems to have figured out her powers, but she is still totally clueless. Because of this, she can't exactly push him away when he asks to touch her. And honestly, she realizes she doesn't even dislike his touch anymore. She panics, wondering if she's developing literal Stockholm syndrome. Taking a deep breath, she snaps herself out of it. She reminds herself that no matter how sweet this setup is, Claude is the ultimate final villain. She knows she is on borrowed time before he shows his true, psychotic colors. If she can just figure out how her powers work, she can peacefully coexist with him. With renewed determination, she vows to solve the mystery. She gears up for a serious research mission before he forces an imprint on her. She arrives at the massive center's library. It took her all morning just to convince a clingy Claude to let her go out alone. She starts pulling books, searching for any clues about her weird guiding condition. She piles up a massive stack of heavy research material. But after reading through every single thesis, she finds absolutely nothing. Defeated, she collapses on the floor like a deflated balloon. Tears prick her eyes as she realizes even Claude barely understands her powers. Suddenly, a familiar voice calls out to her. She turns and sees Irene, her blonde roommate. Rose instantly latches onto her, sobbing like a baby. Irene sweats nervously as Rose begs for a chance to explain everything. Rose sits down with her friend Irene, warning her to brace herself for some massive news. She nervously confesses that she actually became Claude's official guide and they've been living together. Instead of freaking out, Irene just sips her coffee, completely unfazed. She casually admits she already had a hunch. Irene absolutely roasts her, saying Rose is terrible at hiding things, but since she literally has no friends, her secret is safe. Rose clutches her chest, feeling completely cooked by the brutal honesty. She explains her real problem. She has no idea how to activate her guiding powers and is terrified Claude will just toss her aside once he's bored. Looking at her sharp-witted friend, Rose eagerly waits for some high-tier advice. Irene bluntly tells her to just give up, leaving Rose totally speechless. Irene points out that all of Rose's past, hypothetical stories were obviously about Claude. She drops a truth bomb, telling Rose to stop pretending she doesn't have massive feelings for the guy. Rose frantically denies it, insisting the situation is totally different now. She worries that if this keeps up, they'll end up permanently imprinting on each other. Irene stares at her in absolute disgust, fully aware of the highly intimate 19-plus requirements for that process. Without another word, Irene just stands up and totally dips, ignoring Rose's desperate pleas. Suddenly, Rose spots the clock and realizes she promised Claude she'd be back for lunch. She drags her feet back home, completely depressed that her little field trip was a total bust. Just then, a mysterious voice calls out her name. She looks up and sees the golden retriever boy, Daniel, holding a fancy cake box. He smiles brightly and asks how she's been doing. Rose zeroes in on the cake, realizing Daniel is the sweet angel who's been supplying all her favorite snacks. He offers to share it inside, but before she can politely decline, a terrifying dark aura suddenly suffocates the air. Rose starts sweating bullets as she realizes Claude is absolutely furious. Claude steps out of the shadows, glaring daggers at Daniel and asking if he has time to waste. Fearing her favorite lifeboat is about to get sunk, Rose sprints over to defuse the bomb. But seeing her defend Daniel only makes Claude look even more psychotic. With a voice like ice, Claude orders the other Esper to drop the cake and get lost. Daniel instantly bolts like a scared puppy, leaving the cake and Rose completely stranded. Without hesitating, Claude aggressively grabs the back of Rose's hoodie. He mercilessly drags her inside like a sack of potatoes, ignoring her tiny protests. She trembles in fear, realizing he's actively isolating her from everyone else. She desperately wonders if his villainous obsession has already reached the point of no return. Her mind races, terrified that she's officially a prisoner in this luxury mansion. She tightly grips the cake box, praying he won't completely ban her from seeing the sun. Claude just stands over her in complete silence, which is somehow a million times scarier. Suddenly, he breaks the silence and offers to tell her a story about his past. Rose nervously swallows, totally confused about where this is going. Claude explains that when he was 18, he led a strike team, but the older Espers completely ignored his orders. He casually mentions he gave them a gentle warning, viciously beating them down to the floor. A few nights later, the salty Espers tried to jump him in his sleep. In retaliation, Claude tied them all up and tossed them straight into a mutant den, letting them get shredded to pieces. Rose goes completely stiff, horrified by the graphic story. Claude smirks, noting that his little display set a perfect example for anyone else thinking of crossing him. She gulps, realizing she literally just defied his orders by staying out late. He leans in with a dangerous smile, quietly asking what he should do with her. Her brain goes into absolute overdrive, realizing her only two options are imprinting or ending up as mutant Chow. Just as things hit the boiling point, a massive alarm blares announcing a code black threat. Rose blinks, totally confused by the siren. A code black means a catastrophic gate has opened, unleashing monsters that could wipe out the entire country. The last time this happened 14 years ago, the capital was practically reduced to ashes. The deafening sirens continue to wail across the city. Claude immediately shifts into combat mode, pulling on his gloves for the front lines. He turns his back and heads straight for the door, leaving Rose surprisingly worried. He pauses, shooting her a dark look, warning her that she knows exactly what will happen if she steps foot outside. After he leaves, the house falls dead silent. Rose slightly regrets not at least telling him to come back safely. But she shakes off the empathy, reminding herself he's an S-rank monster who can definitely handle himself. Suddenly, the front door intercom lights up. She checks the screen and is completely shocked to see Dr. Azir frantically telling her to open up. She cautiously cracks the door open, asking what he's doing here during a national emergency. Without explaining, Azir grabs her wrist and tells her they need to escape before Claude gets back. Rose tries to pull away, pointing out they should be hiding from the apocalyptic monster invasion. Azir confidently pushes up his glasses and drops a massive bombshell. He totally faked the alarm. Rose's jaw hits the floor, realizing the doctor is absolutely unhinged. He calmly explains it was the only possible way to lure that psycho out of the house. Rose starts hyperventilating, knowing Claude will literally murder Azir when he finds out. She yanks her arm back, demanding to know why he's risking his life for this. As he turns back, she gets a clear look at his face. She gasps in horror, seeing that the doctor is covered in massive bruises and bandages. Azir frantically waves his hands, trying to claim he's just bloated from eating too much salty ramen. But then his expression drops, and he sadly assumes Rose is just as terrified of Claude as he is. Rose waves her hands, insisting she's not being abused. Azir breaks down, revealing he's been a massive victim of Claude's tyranny. He cries that his fiancée is threatening to break off their engagement because of his stress-induced bald spots. His bride-to-be literally thinks he was secretly hiding male pattern baldness the whole time. Wiping his tears, Azir shouts that Claude has been completely playing Rose too. Rose tilts her head, totally lost on how she's being deceived. Azir drops the ultimate plot twist. Claude knew she was a guide this entire time. He cries that Claude literally held him upside down and shook the classified information out of his pockets. Even worse, the entire guiding IV drip incident was a complete setup orchestrated by Claude to lower her guard. Azir bows his head, apologizing for being a rat, but emphasizes that his life was literally on the line. Clenching his fist, he passionately offers to help her run away from the villain. Rose looks down, her world completely shattering as she realizes all of Claude's sweet gestures were fake. She remembers the way he looked at her with those soft, ruby-red eyes. And all those quiet, happy moments they spent eating together. Azir grabs her hands, begging her to trust him. A confident smirk crosses his face as he declares he has a master plan to give Claude exactly what he deserves.